Shabbat Shalom. So you may be familiar with the joke about the synagogue that had an infestation of mice. And they tried all different ways to get rid of them, and nothing worked. And finally, the rabbi said, "I'll take care of it." And a week later, the mice were gone, right? And they said to the rabbi, "What did you do?" And he said, "Oh, it was very simple. I gathered up all the mice and I bar mitzvahed them, and then I knew we'd never see them again." And that is a very common joke, although apparently not so common here. But for reasons which will become clear, I hate that joke, okay? And there's another story which apparently is a true story. I mean, it's a story that's passed down sort of orally in the rabbinate about a rabbi who, every time there was a bar or bat mitzvah, would begin his speech to the kid by saying, "I know that we'll never see you again," okay? And that was certainly a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I mean, you know, if anybody had said that to me, that would have been the end of it. Okay, so Moses is told in the Parsha to go back to Egypt and lead the people out, and he doesn't want to, and he has a number of reasons why he shouldn't do that. And one of his reasons is they will not believe me. Hen lo ya'aminu bi. Okay, they won't believe that Moses was really sent by God. So God has Moses perform two miracles then and there, okay? And he has to do the two miracles there, and then he's going to do them in Egypt, right? The first is God says, because he's a shepherd, right? So, I mean, you know, you can't be a shepherd without a staff, right? So God says, "Throw down your staff," and it becomes a snake, right? And then God says, "Pick it up," and it becomes a staff, right? And the second miracle that he does is God says, "Put your hand in your bosom," right? And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, his hand was encrusted with snowy scales. And he said, "Put your hand back into your bosom," and he put it back, and when he took it out, it was like the rest of his body. In other words, he briefly got leprosy, right? So what's the significance of this particular miracle, right? So Kasuto says it's a demonstration of Moses's willingness to endure whatever hardships are necessary for the cause, right? But Rashi points out that, I mean, what do we know about leprosy in the Torah, right? And in rabbinic thought? Yeah.
People who had the disease have to separate themselves.
Right, they did. They absolutely they did. Okay, but I asked the question poorly. Why do you get leprosy according to the rabbinic understanding of the Torah? For slander, right? It's a punishment for slander, right? Miriam later on, much later on, will say something nasty about Moses' wife, and she gets leprosy, right? So leprosy is a punishment for slander, So the question is, who did Moses slander that he should bring upon himself this punishment of leprosy? God? No.
Rabbi,
Yeah,
the people,
the people. How so?
because his justification to God for not following his directive was that the people would not believe him.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Dia. This was not planted. Right? Right. He slandered the Jewish people. He said, they won't believe me. Right? I'll go to Egypt and I'll say, God has sent me to free you, and the people won't believe him. Right? And so here is what Professor Arnie Eisen, the Chancellor Emeritus of JTS, says about that. Right? Rashi's commentary comes to teach us a harsh truth about Jewish leadership. It requires faith in one's community. This is no small matter. Communities, by their nature, tend to disappoint. They can be weighed down by inertia and resistance to change. They sometimes seek to the level of their lowest common denominator rather than accept the challenge to reach higher. They are often comprised of individuals who prefer to follow the beat of their own drums and not collaborate to form a harmonious symphony. At times, they can be downright unpleasant. It has been observed that Moses loved the Jewish people, but he didn't like them very much, right? And I'm sure, and Art Eisen, right, that Jewish communal leaders sometimes feel the same way, right? But, right, this week's Parsha tells us that we need to stop complaining about the perceived defects and deficiencies of our communities and have more faith that if properly inspired and led, we can achieve new heights, right? And this is a great challenge, right? I mean, and you know, if you have not been a leader in your community and you are catapulted into a position of leadership, right? You learn that very quickly, okay? Like trying to lead Jews is like trying to herd cats, right? They are very difficult sometimes to lead, right? And frankly, it's not just Jews. Right? It's not, I mean, we're talking about Jews, but it ain't just Jews, right? I mean, community, I mean, I remember I had a conversation once with a cousin of mine when I had a summer fellowship at JTS years ago, and we were staying at the Beacon Hotel, and, you know, Facebook, I checked into the Beacon Hotel, and I get a message from my second cousin, Jamie, and Jamie says, I work right across the street from the Beacon Hotel. Let's meet for dinner, right? So we meet for dinner and we're talking and he says, so how do you like your job? And I said, I like it pretty much, right? The main problem with my congregation is that it's made up of human beings, right? And this is a problem. No, I mean, this is a problem, right? Human beings, God, for whatever reason, decided to endow us with free will, right? And we exercise it, right? And God's self calls the Jewish people, what does he call them? Am Kishay Arif, right? A stiff-necked people, right? So we are a stiff-necked people, but that's only one side of the coin, right? So in the Talmud, when God afflicts Moses with leprosy for losing faith in the community, God rebukes him by saying, they are believers, the children of believers. Ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Okay? And leadership of a sacred community, right? And that's what this is. I mean, when we say the Mishabera, right? Kehilat Kehilat Shalom, right? The sacred community, right? And every shul, in Hebrew, the legal name of the shul is Kuf, whatever, right? For us, it's 3 kufs. We're not the KKK, right? But Kehilat Kadosha, the sacred community, right? A Jewish leader must recognize that his or her leadership takes place within the context of a divine calling and the people's response to that calling. The response may be imperfect, but it demands respect and not disparagement, right? Jonathan Sachs said, who is a leader? To this, the Jewish answer is one who identifies with his or her people, mindful of their faults to be sure, but convinced also of their potential greatness and their preciousness in the sight of God, right? And I remember a conversation that I had after my mom got sick with cancer, right? And I spoke to a member of my shul in Connecticut who was an oncologist. So I wanted him to explain what was going on, what the prognosis was. And, you know, we were talking a little bit more, and he said, you know, sometimes it's frustrating in my job because I know that 90% of my patients are going to die. And I said to him, Dennis, how do you cope with that? And he said, I focus on the other 10%. Right? And that was a brilliant, you know, and there is no end of reasons for disappointment in any Jewish community or in the American Jewish community as a whole, right? But if I look, and then you don't necessarily know about this because, you know, I don't go broadcasting, but the number of conversations that people have with me who are growing in their observance, right? And they ask me a question, you know, about how can I have hot coffee on Shabbos without breaking Shabbos, right? Or stuff like that. And you see, you know, or people who didn't know how to read Torah, who learned to read Torah, right? Or didn't know how to read Haftorah and learn to read Haftorah. And people who, you know, you never saw who start coming to shul and becoming active and so on and so forth. And if you're going to be a leader, that's what you have to focus on, right? I mean, God forbid, I'm not comparing that to being an oncologist, right? But you have to focus on what I call the small victories, right? The people whose Jewish soul becomes sparked, becomes rejuvenated, or who have been, you know, active in at one level and take a leap up to the next level, right? And if you're negative about the community, right? Like if you're like the rabbi who says to the bar mitzvah kid, I know I'm never going to see you again. You're never going to see that kid again, right? If you say, you know, now that you are an adult member of the community, you can take a leadership role, right? And realistically, most of them don't, right? But some of them do. Some of them do. And if you are constantly putting out a message of negativity, None of them will, right? And so we have to have faith in our community and our community's capacity to respond to a sacred calling. And that is what is Jewish about Jewish leadership. Shabbat Shalom.
I should go up.
And we continue with the Kaddish before Musaf. Musaf.